A country without borders. Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Well, President Trump used to say, a country without borders is not a country. Was he right? What is the Christian economics view of countries and borders? Let's look at these questions together. Private property. There's a small city in southern Luxembourg named Schengen. It's where the Schengen Agreement was signed in 1985, allowing people to cross the borders of Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Germany, and France. It has been folded into the European Union agreement, allowing people to cross borders across 26 countries in Europe. But these countries agreed to allow people to cross their borders. The U.S. does not allow people, at least by law, to cross our southern border without permission. Ginger and I were touring the beaches of Normandy with 4 other Americans and a French guide. He said he would not talk about politics, but then he did mention that the French coast was part of what the Nazis called the Atlantic Wall that was intended to keep out invaders. He added, "That wall didn't work, so we wonder why your president is building a wall." We ignored him. But our next stop was Pointe du Hoc. It's one of the most heroic stories of World War II. As you may have guessed, it's a point of land, juts out into the ocean, providing a perfect defensive position for the defending Nazis. They could fire long-range cannons up and down the beach, which would be disastrous for the Allied invaders. Army Rangers were assigned to scale the cliffs to take out the cannon. It was estimated that 90% of them would die. A much smaller percentage were killed, and the U.S. Army Rangers were successful. As the French guide was telling us this fascinating story at Pointe du Hoc, he looked past me to ask a woman behind me, "What are you doing?" He asked brusquely. She was not a member of our group, but she was videotaping his lecture. Quote, "You're not supposed to be here," he sternly told her. "Leave," he commanded, and she did. When I returned to the van, I pointed out that his statement to the invader would make him an effective speechwriter for President Trump, because he used the exact same phrases that are used to people who cross the U.S. border without permission. Another source of President Trump's border wall theme could have been written at Harvard. Ginger and I were touring the campus a couple years ago, and when we tried to enter the famous Widener Library, we were stopped by 2 protections: an electronic gate that required a document, and an armed security guard who demanded to see our papers. Again, a President Trump speech was written by the Harvard administration. Quote, "Undocumented people are not allowed entry." Stealing. People in the country illegally are consuming goods they don't own: water, sewer, streets, education, and medical care. Thus, they're stealing. I know, many of you don't like this because you care about illegal immigrants. So let me make one of my common disclaimers. I'm just the boy at the edge of the crowd shouting, "The emperor has no clothes." I'm not responsible for who feels naked as a result. So I'm pleased that you are feeling about illegal immigrants. So now think about the facts. A person who breaks the law and consumes goods that belongs to others is stealing. Should we encourage stealing or discourage it? This is at the heart of all macroeconomic policy. We should incentivize what we want and disincentivize what we don't want. Oh, and let me make a distinction here that President Biden seems to be missing. There are 2 categories of people. I'm talking today about illegal aliens. They're also seekers of asylum. Asylum seekers go through a legal process to enter the country. President Trump reduced that number during his term because of COVID. President Biden has not increased the number because he's concerned the public is not smart enough to differentiate asylum seekers from illegal aliens. Illegals want to break the law so they can live in a country that keeps the law. In economics, we talk a lot about cartels, and my podcast 75 was titled "The Tax Cartel." The first person who breaks the cartel agreement gains the greatest benefit. It's like that with illegal border crossers. Those who can break the law while others keep it gain the greatest economic benefit. Senator Obama promised to introduce legislation if he was elected in 2008 dealing with immigration. He did not. And Jorge Ramos at Univision got him to admit to failure to keep that promise in a television interview. Democrats controlled the presidency and both houses of Congress during all of 2009 and 2010. They could have passed any immigration legislation they wanted. They chose not to. So they own any border problems. I'm recording this in late April of 2021, when the Democrats have the same advantage. They control both legislative branches and the executive branch. For the last 3 months, they could have passed any immigration changes they wanted to. They have not. Do you care? My podcast number 69 is titled, Who Cares? It draws from a quote by Art Lindsley, who says, government should punish evil but not do good. The church should do good but not punish evil. I think Mr. Lindsley is mostly accurate. Governments are not chartered, designed, nor equipped to do good. And government should not be trying to do good by allowing people in the country illegally. You could make an argument that illegal immigration could apply to the Old Testament scripture, quote, my laws are higher than your laws, and my ways higher than your ways. This is effectively explained in Letter from Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King Jr., which I've read many times in my life. MLK was a hero because he was willing to break a human law that he believed violated God's law. But then those laws were changed with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. By the way, the Civil Rights Act was passed over the Democratic filibuster led by Al Gore Sr., and a higher percentage of Republicans in the Senate voted for the Voting Rights Act of 1965 than Democrats did. In his vetting interviews, Attorney General Merrick Garland was asked, are illegals illegal? He gave a confusing answer. Really? Really? The highest ranking legal official in the U.S. government can't determine if illegal behavior is illegal. My podcast number 65 is titled, The End of Reason. Maybe we are there. In my book, Biblical Economic Policy, Sergei Seidamatov and I identified 10 biblical commandments of economics. One of them is honor those in power. Seems like we should. Ginger was working in Albuquerque, and I spent the day touring around town. At the University of New Mexico, there was a large banner declaring, humans are not illegal. Okay, but their behavior is. This is just weak thinking. Or actually, it's not thinking at all. It's feeling. Christians should feel and think. But feeling is destroying our nation's ability to think. More on that in another upcoming podcast. I'm considering making my small city of Midlothian a, quote, sanctuary city against the IRS, as San Francisco and other cities are doing against ICE. I might tell the IRS this year, quote, I am an undocumented taxpayer. I will not submit documents to you. Nations are biblical. There are no undocumented students at Dallas Baptist University where I teach. As a professor, I get a list a couple times each semester informing me that undocumented students will be removed from our online program until they show up at the bursar's office and make financial arrangements to get their documents in order. Think about that. Of the 5,000 students at my university, none are undocumented with the university. I assume that's true at all universities. We're going to have graduation here in a few weeks. The provost will stand at the lectern and declare, I verify the students who stand before you have been documented by their professors and the registrar to have completed the work required for the degree they have earned. All of them are documented. But why don't they just show up at a work interview and state, I'm an undocumented graduate of DBU? Would the employer discriminate against them? Look, think about this. I'm the undocumented president of the United States. I'm an undocumented congressman and senator, and I'm an undocumented Supreme Court justice. But I would be required to show a document just to get into the Capitol building, and claiming to be an undocumented senator might get me thrown in the loony bin. 6 of the support beams holding up Pilgrim Chapel at Dallas Baptist University, have scriptures written on them. The very first one, the one that attendees can see best, is from Matthew 21:13, and it reads, "My house shall be called a house of worship for all nations." This is the famous scene where Jesus throws the money changers out of the temple. He's angry that they're discriminating against those who crossed the national border and had to exchange money to buy their temple sacrifice. While taking a 3-week course in biblical geography at Jerusalem University College, I visited an underground cave where doves were raised to be sold as sacrifices at the temple during the time of Jesus. Look, Jesus was not angry about the sale of the doves and lambs as sacrifice. He was angry that people were disallowing them from worshiping. See, this would have been the perfect opportunity for Jesus to complain about the existence of nations. But he didn't. He didn't complain. There are many other scriptures that support nations and borders. I won't take time to recite all of them today, but suffice it to say, nations are in God's plan. Look, God may have called for one church, but he didn't call for one nation. Thus, national borders align with God's design. Economics versus family. When you picked sides for sandlot baseball when you were a kid, you picked the best first. In economics terms, we should choose people who provide greater services for their neighbors. That's loving your neighbor. Consumer surplus is a measure of love for your neighbor. Who loves his neighbor more? The one who produces $25,000 a year in consumer surplus, or the one who delivers $100,000? Writing in the Wall Street Journal this week, Jason Riley says, "Our immigration laws need updating. Should the U.S. de-emphasize family ties and put more weight on the education and skills of newcomers? And how do you strike that right balance?" End quote from Jason Riley in the Wall Street Journal. I'm trying to imagine Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban using family relationships as a basis for drafting players instead of the merit-based system he very effectively uses. His team would be very ineffective. How should we draft people into our country? Based on family relationships or economic performance? Family makes the country poorer. Economic performance makes the country richer. I've watched for years as engineering graduates from my alma mater, the University of Texas at Arlington, are sent back to China and India, but poor laborers are allowed in the country from Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Honduras. It's a pretty simple equation. Look, American families make an average of $68,000 a year. If you want to enrich the country, you accept immigrants who can provide more than that average. Accepting immigrants who make less than the average impoverishes the country. We are told that the illegal immigrants crossing our southern border are good people. Then what happens to the country they escape? Good people leave and bad people stay. So what does that predict for the future of the country they're leaving? If you cared about the future of those countries, wouldn't you want the best people to stay to rebuild them? This question was asked but not answered by the Obama administration when they accepted Syrian refugees into the U.S., claiming they are, quote, good people, but then requiring them to apply for U.S. citizenship. Think about it. If you loved your neighbor, in this case Syria, would you want good people to stay in Syria or leave permanently? I have some experience in this. I've been teaching for 7 years in Eastern Europe in the Baltics. All 3 Baltic countries are suffering brain drain. The prosperous who can leave do. In economic terms, we say that human capital is decreasing. This makes the country poor. National borders are biblical. They should be enforced in a way that cares for neighbors, protects biblically endorsed private property, and promotes economic thriving. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time.